British have exerted a force on a modern world stronger, perhaps, than that of any other group. And yet they live, and always have, on an island barely the size of Minnesota. More perhaps than any other country, England is like the United States in basic attitudes and beliefs. You will find this similarity everywhere, beginning with the strong religious tradition which underpins her national life. You may also see a certain similarity, at least on the surface, between the famous pub and the corner bar in the cities of America. The pub, which is practically an institution in Britain, is something like the stateside corner bar, only more so. It's more like a friendly club, a neighborhood gathering place, where men can meet to share the quiet pleasures of a glass of beer and conversation, where nothing is hurried, a little world all its own. Chances are you'll enjoy it. But in full fairness, let it be said that in spite of all the similarities, there are differences between the British and us. There are bound to be. Differences, you know, don't imply either superiority or inferiority. They're just separate ways of doing things. You'll become aware of them, and perhaps be disturbed at first by some of them.
I think these British are kind of hard to get to know.
Well, it seems so at first, until you've been here a while. Maybe they are a bit more reserved than we are, but there's a reason for it. After all, there's 50 million people on this little island. That's enough to make anyone respect privacy, his own and everyone else's.
That's about it, Sergeant. In their quest for privacy, the British make the very most of it they can. The garden is the Englishman's traditional refuge, and practically every Englishman has one, which he tends with pride and care. Behind the mansions of the rich and the cottages of the modest alike bloom lovely oases in which life is all discipline and color, and a man can live, at least for a while, out of the crowded day, close to the nature he reveres. His home is his castle, however grand or however modest it may be. And here, as in his garden, he creates a sense of order, the respect for tradition and continuity, for values which have endured for generations, for family ties, and the belief in the home as the central unit of civilization. You may find yourself a guest in such a home, and when you do, you should treat the occasion with the dignity it deserves, for an invitation to a man's castle is not lightly given. But even here, as you relax in the strong similarities you are finding between British life and your own, you will be reminded of differences, small but inevitable.
Where's your home, Bill?
Well, I grew up in Cambridge, sir.
Did you really? I grew up in Cambridge, too.
You did? You mean you've lived in the States?
Oh, no. Father means our own Cambridge. We have one here, too.
Maybe a bit older than yours.
Would you like anything more? More tea, Bill?
No, thanks. I'm fine.
Can I help you now, Mother?
Not just now, thank you, dear. I'll let you know.
I'd be glad to help with the beating if I can.
With the beating? No, thank you. I can manage.
I used to do it all the time for my mother before we got the electric mixer.
Electric mixer?
Yes. It makes it much easier.
Does it indeed?
Father thinks that if he ever went to America, he would see one vast gadget factory.
Electric beaters? I wonder what they do to the food.
The traditional British reluctance to acquire gadgets and mass-produced items is not as strong as it once was. You may still encounter it occasionally, however, but don't let it mislead you. Britain, remember, set the pace in jet aviation, radar, television. British workmanship has produced and is still producing some of the finest manufactured items in the world. But let's get back to the subject of differences, for they obviously will intrigue you most of all at first. Take money. Now, we'll make no bones about it. The British currency system is a nightmare for the American. The basic unit is the pound, the equivalent of $2.80. Every pound is divided into 20 shillings, worth about 14 cents apiece. Half a shilling is a sixpence. Then there is a 2-shilling piece, and a half crown, which is worth 2.5 shillings. A threepence is half a sixpence. There are 12 pence or pennies to every shilling, and half a penny is called a halfpenny. And half a pound is a 10-shilling note. Prices are also given in terms of guineas, a coin which doesn't even exist, but which is worth 21 shillings. All clear? Good. Next subject. Language. We share a common language with the British, but there may be times when you don't believe it.
I beg your pardon, sir. Could you tell me if there's a hardware store in the neighborhood?
An hardware store, sir? Oh, you mean the ironmongers?
I do. I want to buy a garbage can.
A garbage can, sir. Now, I think you'll find it's a dustbin you're after. Well, sir, you keep to the near side down to the bottom of the footpath, right round the roundabout, and then it's just past the bull. You can't miss it, sir.
But differences, you know, can be exaggerated out of all proportion. Consider the British teapot, poor, overworked symbol of misconception, and an appropriate illustration of how exaggeration can distort reality. And the simple truth is that the British like tea, most of them, and they down a fair amount of it each day. But, to repeat, differences can be exaggerated out of all proportion. There's nothing in the British approach to tea drinking to justify the wild exaggerations prevalent in so much American folklore. You know the picture. People chattering like squirrels while they swill and nibble in a ceremonial ritual as stylized as the tango. You'd be ashamed not to meet them. They're such enjoyable figments of the imagination. But they don't exist, whatever you may have thought. And the part of England they represent is on the far side of the moon. Misconception, growing out of unfamiliarity, is, of course, a two-way street. You may not have thought of it that way, but listen.
Know any Yanks?
Yes, one or two.
Like them?
Well, yes, rather. Nice enough chaps. Take a bit of knowing, though.
Now, we may not think that we're so hard to get to know, but from the British point of view, well, permit an Englishman to sit in your seat and see how bizarre some American customs and habits might seem through his eyes, particularly in exaggerated form. And not only sights, but sounds, too. Remember, we are discussing the difficulties of understanding English as the English speak it. But consider what an Englishman might think of this conversation.
Come on, Daddy, let's buzz. Cool it, man. Let's cut. That flick don't wait.
No sweat, man. We'll split.
Although the British are a sports-loving people, there are many things they don't understand about our games. Listen, for example, to how one English reporter describes the great American pastime of football.
Men in brightly colored helmets, like the crew of a spaceship, rushed on and off the field. Play seemed to be a mixture of conjuring, sleight of hand, and human skittles, and was constantly stopped by the referees. The stoppages provided the fun. Pretty girls leapt up and down in a sort of Maori war dance to stir up the crowd, shouting, "How do you like your oysters? Raw, raw, raw." Strategy is evidently based on this assumption. Nobody knows who's got the ball, so to be safe, knock down everybody in sight. The biggest pile of bodies indicates where the ball is.
As part of their effort to make the U.S. Airmen's adjustment easier, the community relations advisors in Britain have made an informal survey of the problems which servicemen encounter most frequently. We might call them gripes. The British, however, are somewhat more restrained in their vocabulary.
The shortage of suitable housing emerges as the #1 problem on just about every list. And oh, the things that are said about this problem. We're joking, you know. Please bear that in mind. The situation is not anywhere near as bad as all this. But a humorous approach makes the point better, as you Americans say. And the point here is that not all the flats and houses offered are as ancient and unmanageable or as haunted as the Tower of London. Oh, this is discouraging. Can you bear any more of it? Oh, dear. This poor chap is having a frightful time of it, isn't he? Driving on the left side of the road and the right side of the car is another thing which can confuse Americans. It all can be so bewildering to newcomers. Confusion, particularly at first, is understandable. But if you're going to drive, it is extremely important that you get to know the rules immediately and observe them every time you're in a car. Well, he's learned his lesson. Please, learn yours an easier way. Keep to the left. And guess what another problem is? The weather. Americans don't seem to like it very much. They find it too wet, too often. It's reasonable enough that people might become annoyed by the weather. But now really, there's not a great deal we can do about it, is there? And anyway, to tell you the truth, some of us don't care much for it either.
Despite their day-to-day differences, most British people by far are united in basic things, such as their respect for the Crown and their fundamental, bone-deep belief in democracy. For England is, after all, the world's oldest democracy. And of all her glorious traditions, free government resting on the rights of the people is the most sacred.